This episode of RetroBlasting is brought to you by Yojo Outlet and Museum Center. They know vintage toys, and when it comes to vintage toys, knowing is the entire battle. The day has come. It is now time to restore the Defiant Gantry-Crawler.
The Defiant's launch base opens to reveal a flight control center.
Lift off!
This restoration makes the flag look like a cakewalk in terms of the toy itself. Now, the flag did have the custom plinth and everything that we made for it, the big hull, but this is a different beast altogether. Many moving parts, a crank mechanism, very fragile doors that are known to shatter if you look at them funny, and we didn't want to get this wrong because this thing has been in a crawl space for 33 years almost, maybe a little less than that. We'll say 30 years in a crawl space, and there's no telling what rigors this thing has been put through, both temperature-wise. The stickers were melted to it, the adhesives had run everywhere. I spent hours and hours cleaning this thing up. I mean, it's been days just getting to the point where I'm filming and talking to you right now. So the first step that we're gonna do is we're going to fix a bent fender. Yeah, we're starting a little small, but then we're going to get into the lifter mechanism. So let me show you how to fix this bent fender, and then we'll move on to the big event. A common problem with Hasbro plastic, G.I. Joe plastic especially, are the white stress marks. Now, this happens to a lot of toy lines, but plastics are all different. And what I've learned from working on the Defiant is that G.I. Joe plastics don't quite work the same way that a lot of plastics work when it comes to getting them hot, boiling them, things like that. You really have to treat G.I. Joe plastic like a different animal. If G.I. Joe plastic gets too hot, it actually takes on the consistency of toffee. It really doesn't want to let go, but it becomes a mess. So my recommendation for removing these white stress marks is you want a heat gun, but you always want it on low. You never want to go to the high setting, and you always keep it about 6 inches away from the plastic, and you be patient. Patience is the key. So we're going to watch this, hopefully, stress mark magically disappear through the power of low heat. You want to keep this thing moving. You can give it a little bit every now and then, but you don't want to focus on the part so much that it starts to warp or melt. And you always keep it on the low heat setting. You also don't want to get peripheral parts too hot as well. Like you wouldn't want to warp this while you're trying to fix this. There we go. Look at that. Ah, that's nice. Like I said, you just got to be patient. All right, so we have this wheel assembly. There are a number of them that go all the way around. There are 8 in all, I believe, 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, there are 8 of these. The 2 wheels attached to a hub. Like that sound? I don't. Ah, that's nice. So before we can put this Defiant back on its wheels, we have to address one more major issue, and that is the lifter mechanism for the shuttle cradle. Now, this was the main event of the USS Defiant, but it was notoriously under-engineered. And that's because from everything I was able to suss out on various forums and in G.I. Joe websites, the design of the Defiant was handed off to 3 different engineering teams. There was the engineering team for the shuttle, there was the engineering team for the booster, and there was the engineering team for the Gantry-Crawler. And apparently, Hasbro kept asking the Gantry-Crawler team to cut a few corners, use some cheaper materials, some lighter weight plastics in order to get this thing to a certain price point for Christmas of '87 or whenever it came out in '87. That being said, that means that the lifter arms for the Defiant have these attachment points made out of plastic for the tension springs that assist in the lifting of the Defiant. And when the Defiant's shuttle system is down, which is how most people stored it in their homes, that put the tension springs under maximum load because they designed it so that the springs would be at full extension when the shuttle was down so that it would then relieve the pressure of the weight when it would come up. Well, over time, in the crawl space and with many other Defiants out there, the springs finally rip those plastic attachment points off the arms and then rattle around in the undercarriage of the Defiant, and that's what happened here. So what I had to do was engineer new parts out of metal flashing and JB Weld that could then be wrapped over the existing or remaining remnants of those attachment points for the springs. Let them cure, get them in the right shape, do a few trims here and there. And now what I'm going to be doing is putting this assembly back together, putting the springs back in, and seeing if the more robust metal attachments to this lifter system are going to make it more durable. It could work, it could fail. You're about to see if that's the case. All right, so the first step in rebuilding the cradle lifter is putting the crank rod back in, which had practically fallen out of this one, and I'm really grateful that the part was actually still there. Normally, this piece would stay in place pretty well, but this one, I guess it's seen some better days, and it had kind of come loose. Now, before you put any of these parts back in for the Defiant, you want to use what's called a silicone grease because that is actually safe for plastics. And there were greased gears and metal rods in the original Defiant. That grease has dried up and become useless in 30 years, and it was just gunk, which I washed off, and now I've reapplied silicone grease to these parts. So the way this works is the gear, obviously, this gear right here, is going to be going toward the front of the Defiant. The crank goes toward the back, and you put it through this hole at the back at a slight angle, and you want this washer that's on here to make sure that there's a washer on the rod as well. I don't exactly know where this washer is supposed to go. There are a few broken pieces inside this channel, this trench, possibly from when the springs busted all a while ago. But for the purposes of keeping it away from the crank handle, I just find a place to put this washer for now, and maybe we'll figure it out later. But you put the crank all the way up to the end, and you let that gear fall into its little cradle. The next step is to put the main gear system into the assembly. There are 3 gears. The main center gear is what interacts with the crank handle gear. This piece was greased with the silicone grease just like the crank handle was. And it slips in like that into its housing. And then we have 2 braces. And then we have to put in the 2 brackets that keep it secured to the undercarriage. All right, so we have these brackets that are screwed down underneath the Defiant. It's pretty straightforward. The bracket goes around the main drive shaft of the gear system, and then it's screwed down into this hole. So they key right in. There's no guesswork here. You don't want to over tighten. Now the springs, thankfully, were still with this Defiant. Even though they had ripped the arm attachment points off, they were still in the undercarriage, and I was able to retrieve them. The springs do have dual hooks, and I decided to put heat shrink on both hooks on either end of each spring because not only were the springs now going to be wrapped around metal flashing, which was a new attachment point that could be abrasive to the spring ends, but the other side where they attach to the Defiant is just brittle plastic. And you can actually see the points where they started to wear away at the plastic of the vintage toy, cutting into the superstructure itself. So I wanted to alleviate that problem on both sides of the spring.
Want your needle nose again? Is that a euphemism? Okay. I'll get him. Don't move. I don't want to hit the display cases. I can get the hook in just fine when it's dangling downward.
But not when it's at an angle.
But not when it's at the angle that I need for it to actually...
So do we need to lower it more?
Yes. Really?
All right, guys, here's the situation. So this spiral at the end of the crankshaft has to have a backstop behind it. And you can see where that backstop gave way and exploded at some point in the past. Now, this is a very, very common issue with loose Defiants. I went back and I did my homework after Tim and I realized that we weren't solving this issue, and I did my homework again, and sure enough, the engineers at Hasbro in 1987 had gone to the Hasbro brass and said, this piece is under-engineered. We need the budget for more robust materials to reinforce this section of the toy, and the Hasbro leadership refused. That's from the account of the main engineer on the Defiant, and I'm sorry to say, every attempt that I made to fix this, which I stayed up till 1 in the morning trying to fix this problem, there's nothing there at this point to hang on to. There's nothing there to build a homemade piece around. Maybe if I had 3D printing skills, I could do it. I can kind of see the possibility of a 3D printed piece that sort of sets down in this honeycomb. So if you were to sort of make a piece that kind of grabbed these various areas and came down like this, maybe grabbed it on these sides as well, and you would put it in after the crank rod was installed, and it would kind of come down over it and keep this crank rod from backing out during operation, then I could see that being a possibility. But at this stage, there really isn't an opportunity. So what I've done in the meantime is I have undone the springs because, as I said, when you store this thing, you want those springs undone anyway if it's laying down. I was going to be doing that as a matter of course because you don't want those springs under tension on the best of times. So while we can't repair the lifter mechanism on this Defiant in terms of it going down, which is important, and we were going to be undoing the springs anyway, there are a lot of rare pieces that survived with this Defiant that make it worthy of continuing the restoration and finishing. In the meantime, I appeal to the 3D printing maker movement community to look into this issue and see if you can put together a kind of fix for this, some sort of part that goes in during the crank rod installation that goes down after the fact into that honeycomb and grabs it in various places to recreate that backstop while also giving extra reinforcement. Those are not skills that I have. Those are not skills that I'm going to be acquiring anytime soon. I'll keep looking into it, but in the meantime, let's move on with the rest of the restoration. I'm going to put the crank parts back on as you saw me install a second ago so that all of it is kind of finished and complete underneath, and then we're going to flip the superstructure over and get on to rebuilding the actual crawler gantry itself. Before I set the Defiant back down on its wheels, I wanted to show you that I won't actually be setting it back down on its wheels. In fact, I'm going to be using my high school yearbooks, which I had planned to burn, but then I found out from another person online that they make a great Defiant stand, pedestal, whatever you want to call it, because the wheels are actually too fragile for the weight of the entire toy. So you want to actually get the weight up off the wheels when it's sitting on the ground. I figured we'd start at the back of the crawler, which actually becomes the front once the shuttles are lifted. Now, to explain that, when the shuttles are down and the crawler is actually moving like a vehicle, the shuttles are facing the opposite direction. But when you raise the crawler cradle, the shuttle cradle, it all reverses. And so then this becomes the front, quote unquote. So let me show you how we did actually repair the system in one respect, in that the crank now lifts the doors. And there we have it. And now we have access to the interior of the crawler, which is where we're going to start our restoration process. Miraculously, despite this Defiant being in a crawl space for 33 years and coming out with all kinds of broken parts and missing parts, it still retained the rarest part every Defiant owner is looking for. And that is this little cap right here that tells you which direction to turn the crank if you want the cradle to go up or down. This piece actually rattled right out of the bottom of the Defiant when I was moving it, and I couldn't believe my luck. I figured it was missing like so many were. In fact, a lot of people tell stories about how their parents didn't even realize that part was a part, and it never got put on the vehicle to begin with. And that's it. That's where it goes. Moving on. One little tip, just to make sure you're aware. If you are re-stickering a Defiant after a teardown with, say, Toy Hacks Cobra stickers, make sure that you re-sticker the pieces before you reinstall them into the Defiant. You know, model kit protocols are probably best when it comes to stickering, and I just want to make that clear to anybody that might not think of that ahead of time, because it's going to be really difficult for you to get your fingers in certain places to cleanly put those stickers on after the pieces are already in place. All right, that said, I have pre-stickered, re-stickered, the engine room and the control room inserts for the Defiant. The engine room goes on the left. Just kind of slots in there like that. No problem. You have two engine covers you need to be aware of. They go in these two slots right here. Now let's make sure we know which one goes to which. I have my instruction sheet here. So you're going to have one with some rivets on it. That one's going to go closest to the entrance. Maybe it goes the other way. Yeah, there it goes. And then you have one with these ridges, like ruffles. And that's going to go farther away. All right, so that is a completed engine room. I'll zoom in on that for you so you can see that. This is our completed engine room module right here. Now you might see some areas where there was some bad sticker placement before. I have been very careful to try and put the stickers where the instruction sheet said, but that being the case, there is going to be some staining when you're talking about removing old stickers. That's just part of the game. That's just, you know, something you have to deal with. All right, let's move over to the control room. We have our control room insert right here, which has been pre-stickered. Has everything going for it. And it just pops right on in. Yeah. All right, so there's our control room all lined up and ready to go. All right, the next step is going to be getting these gun emplacements put back in. Now, these are, what's the kindest way to put this? These are highly sought after pieces, and they have some common problems. So one of the seats that came out of this particular Defiant, let me zoom in on this. One of the seats that came out of this one, you can see that it has a broken control stick. These tabs love to break off. They love to just snap because these hold the large cannons that are put on them. I've never seen a chair that has a larger set of cannons put on it. I don't know what Hasbro was thinking there, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, another thing about these is that you see this little broken off part right here? I don't know why they put this part on the chair to begin with. I honestly don't understand it because it makes it difficult to install and it makes it difficult to remove. And most of the ones you'll find, they don't have that piece on there anymore, and neither did the ones that I've got here. And frankly, I'm not really going to miss it because I don't understand the point of it. All right, so let's get back to installing the actual chair. So I have found two chairs that have their control sticks still with them. They look pretty nice. They look good. And they're keyed on the bottom with this kind of, I don't know, circular system with some wings on it. And all you really do is you just kind of set them in sideways and then turn them to lock them in. And they fit very snug and they move up and down, and I just don't see the point of that broken off piece being there. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm going to push these seats all the way back because I'm planning on, storing this with the shuttles down. And that means that when these cannons are put on there, I don't want the cannons sticking as far out as possible. I want them as far back as possible. So I'm going to push the seats into a recessed mode to keep those cannons as far in as possible once all this is completed. But I'm not going to put those cannons on just yet. I'm going to wait because I still have some other gantry related stuff to do. And the biggest thing I have to deal with is this cradle plate right here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reinsert this detail piece here. It looks like some sort of maintenance, kind of insert. Not really sure what the purpose of it is, but it has two tabs on the back and it slots in like this. God, I hope I'm getting this right. I think I'm going to use the heat gun on this one. Okay, sorry for not quite showing you that install. That was touch and go. That was not fun, but I'm glad that it's finished and it's back in its place and no tabs are broken. I had to use the heat gun about 5 or 6 times and keep test fitting it, trying to get it in there, and the parts kept stressing at the tabs, so I had to reheat it to make the tab stress go away, as you saw with the Fender demonstration. But now it's solid, it's not going anywhere, and we can move on to a bigger issue. If you happen to watch the original Defiant teardown that I did, you might recall that the inner skin of this cradle had a factory manufacturing error on it. And it was this right here. You might see that. This is a factory error. It is not a break. It looks like something that was caused by some kind of heat or cutting device, but there is no effective and pretty way to fix that. Now the nice thing is, despite the expense, there are a lot of incomplete gantries and cradles out there in various parts and pieces. So I went and did some digging, and I found a part that was completely intact. I just had to buy the additional cradle lower part with it, which I didn't need. And what I did was I separated this from the donor part, and now I'm just going to sleeve that right into our childhood original. And now I'm going to screw this down, and then we'll move on to the next phase. So the next step is going to be putting all of the gantry back around the crawler, all of the human access points, and I have them all right here. Now, one of the things about this setup is that you have 3 turret cannons. Now, one of those cannons is on the front, and it is mounted topside. It's like this. But the other 2 cannons are mounted underneath the gantry. They're mounted like this. And you can see an example of this right here. If I flip this over, it's on the underside of the gantry. Now, what makes this frustrating is that a lot of these cannons have broken tabs. And I'll show you this in a close-up photograph, but a lot of these cannons have these tabs. There's 2 tabs to hold them on the underside or top side. They're all identical. And one of those tabs or both of those tabs ends up broken off. And I had one gantry both gantries had their, the ones with the underside turrets had the tabs broken off and the guns were gone. In fact, the only gun that was left was the one that was topside over the driver's compartment for the crawler. And I said, okay, well, I got to get 2 cannons, and then I got to you know, find a way to get them attached, because you're never going to find these cannons with both tabs. It just doesn't happen anymore. You know, I'm sitting there staring into the middle distance wondering, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this a durable fix? How am I going to get this cannon back on this underside piece without, you know, doing something stupid like gluing it in place where it doesn't move? Which I wasn't going to do, because that would have just been a mess. And I think half my brain was actually thinking about Cheez-Its, honestly. And then suddenly I looked at this, of all things. It is a Scotch tape dispenser. One of those ones that you get at like Office Depot, where you can get them at Walmart. And it had a big roll of tape in it, but it also had, and I'll show you this in close-up, it also had this tiny loop on it. You see that loop right there? It's kind of wider, but it creates this perfect lip. And I thought, well, it's the right color, it's the right shape, I just have to cut it down to size. And so I used an X-Acto knife, I cut the piece off, I cut it to the proper width, and then I glued it onto the cannon. And the result was pretty much flawless. I mean, as adult collectors, we're not going to be, you know, using these things like toys, at least I hope. It can move on its mount. So like if I gently, you know, move it, it will move just fine. It doesn't fall off, it's not broken. I just used some Loctite to put that piece on there, that little hoop, and it works just fine. So we have two pieces of gantry that go on this side of the crawler. The first is the gun chair part of the gantry, pretty straightforward. And this clips in right here on the front. You have your standard posts that go into these holes. The posts are molded into strategic points on the fuselage of the crawler, or the chassis of the crawler. And so you want to line those up. I probably should lift this out of the way slightly. So we'll use our crank handle that works well in one direction. Yo! All right, you see why it's really important to have the spring tension and all kinds of other stuff involved, and that's why it's not worth fixing if it can't be fixed right, because the Defiant was an under-engineered piece of garbage in some respects, and Hasbro should be ashamed. All right, so we're going to set this right here. The other section is the section that has the underslung gun between two staircases. And you want to make sure that this lip right here of this staircase goes under this part right here, the far end of the gantry piece we just put in. You got your gunner chair hole in it that has some wings on the side. They match up to the wings right here. So we're just going to line those up properly, and it will slot right in there. And then we just want to turn it. And that's as straightforward as it gets for that chair. A lot easier than the other chairs on the back side. Before we actually get around to the other side, we have to put the vapor pod accelerator back on the very front of the crawler, and it just slots in right here. It's as simple as that. So that is now fitted into the vehicle. We're now on the driver's side of the crawler, and you'll notice that the driver's side section of the gantry that has the driver's compartment is still in place. And that is because upon disassembly, it refused to come out. And if I tried to remove it, it was going to break some tabs. So I left it in there and I just dealt with it being in place while I carefully cleaned the entire Defiant gantry. Crawler, whatever you want to call it. All right, now we have one section of gantry that has to go in, but before we put that in, you need to be aware that in between the sections of gantry on this side is a very large radiator part, and that part was oddly missing from this Defiant, which is weird because it had so many rare pieces left, but this large chunky bit right here was just totally gone. Now that the radiator is in place, we take this last piece of gantry here and we just put it right over it. Just looking for that post to line up with that tube. The reason I'm pushing down on this so hard is that I need these stairs right here to line up with some grooves on the actual crawler itself. And I think we're there. Just got to pull that radiator out. And I think it'll take pressure off of this. Yeah, the radiator just wasn't sitting flush. Oh, there it goes. That was frightening. I knew something wasn't right. All right, the radiator's not moving, which is good. It's in place. The Defiant, this far side, it seems like it wants to fit flush. But again, it's always a compromise because you don't want to break anything, because there's no going back if something gets broken. So as I was getting everything ready for the next set of parts to go in, I noticed that this gun mounting point right here at the top of the cradle needs to be addressed. And in the instruction sheet, Hasbro just says slap it in there. But the mounting point for this thing, if you can see that, I'm going to zoom in right here. The mounting point for this thing is really big. And I just don't see it going in there very well. So I've decided I'm going to partially unscrew the tray to widen that gap and get that thing in there more safely. So let me do that real quick. This Defiant Gantry is like the song that never ends. I'm going to assume that's where the mount goes. Not really sure how that's supposed to work functionally. I guess it can do that. I guess that's what it does. It does that and then comes up like this for the purposes of defense. It's terrible. All right, well, you know what? It's what the instructions say. It's where it's supposed to go. So we're not going to agonize over this. We're going to put it in there and move on with our lives. So now we're going to address the gun chairs at the back. Now they have these massive cannons on them, and the instruction sheet for the Defiant says that you have to assemble the cannons and then put them on the mounting tabs. But I am just not certain that those tabs, after 33 years, right here and right here, I'm not sure they're going to hold up to the rigors of that. They tend to break, and I've seen more than a few on eBay where they've been broken. People are even 3D printing entire new seats for the Defiant Crawler because of that problem. So I took this automotive trim puller and I popped the cannons apart very carefully with it because I feel like it's going to be easier on the gun chair if I put the lower half of the cannon on first and then attach the upper half. Now the halves of these cannons, they look like this. They've got, one bottom part with the slots on it and then the top part sandwiches onto it. And you end up with these two slots. And then you are supposed to just jam that onto the gun seat. I'm not feeling that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it this way. There we go. And now that that pressure is off without a lot of fumbling, I'm going to press these together. I think that is a much safer way to do it. Now, I could be wrong. Somebody could be screaming at me right now. But I just feel like that's a much better way to attach that gun. Time for the blast shield to go on. This is essentially the seat or foot pad that the booster sits on when it's in the cradle. And we have it right here. This is the childhood original cradle piece. I have cleaned it and re-stickered it. These are the sticker orientations as described by the instructions. I'm just going to live with that. So yeah, you see those 4 slots. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 slots. And these pegs, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to go into those slots this way. And then the sort of shuttle engine boosters sit in this, or the boosters engine cones sit in these impressions. I want to be careful putting this in because I don't want to put too much pressure on this folding blast shield because it has fragile hinges as well. Everything about the Defiant is just fragile. And once this thing goes in, it's probably not coming out again. Boy, I don't like this.
Ooh! Okay, not good. Not good.
So I'm not happy about this, but I had to take the entire cradle skin back out again, as you can see from the condition of the Defiant. Now I've gone backwards, but there are these tabs right here on the bottom lip internally, and then I'm trying to get them to punch through right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was able to get that one, which you heard was a loud bang, but I can't seem to get these other 3 to come through. So I'm going to keep working on it and see if I can't make it happen. This has finally been snapped back into place and safely. And for any of you out there who are disappointed that a number of these repairs on this Defiant are getting done between camera shots, please keep in mind that unlike a lot of toys, the G.I. Joe Defiant, everything on it's expensive. Everything on it. And so if you make a mistake, that one mistake could literally cost you over $100 if you're lucky. Some of these parts are going for $500, $600 online, like the big blue doors, which are coming up later in the video. And if you make a mistake because you're splitting your attention between what you're saying to people on camera and what you're doing with the toy, you might not have a restoration video at the end of it, and you also might not have an item to even work with or talk about in a later video. It might all go up wrong. So this is a very different animal, and I'm trying to make sure that the end result is 100%, barring that crank shaft, of course. But other than that, I'm trying to make sure that all of this comes together flawlessly. We're headed to the big elephant in the room, which is the big blue gantry doors. We're on the last stage before we have to deal with those. And I admit, I've been delaying it because, one, they're naturally the last thing to go on, but two, everything can go wrong with those doors. And so I'm really on pins and needles about those. So let's deal with the crawler driver's compartment. All right, we have just a few parts to put on. But you got to be careful with them. So the first part you want to put on is this chair. It's just a captain's chair. Pegs right in. Well, if I can peg it in. All right, so we now have our chair. Swivels nicely. It's in place. I don't really even know if that's the captain's chair. It's just a chair, and it's supposed to go there. And then we have the two dicier prospects. We have the windscreens. Now, I've given these a good cleaning. I haven't really done a lot of defogging on them, but that's because I'm so skittish about working with Defiant parts. These were childhood original surviving pieces. I did not have to source these, and I really don't want to have to go buy new ones because I busted up, others, giving them an over-exuberant scrubbing. All right, so the more square one here, it goes right here on the front. And these hinge points are always nail biting. You just want to be, there you go. You just want to be real careful with these. There's a little bit of chassis warping going on here, but not enough for me to want to start really torquing it. So I'm going to call that a win. And then we have our second piece, our second window. Canopy, whatever you want to call it. It goes on right here. You can't be too ginger with these because these hinges on these Hasbro vehicles love to break. Okay. I'd love for that to snap closed, but I also don't want it to snap. So again, We're going to call that a win, and we're going to move on to the blue doors. All right, here we go. Now, I got some criticism at the time that I did the teardown video, which if you haven't seen it, go watch it because I tear down most of the gantry and crawler. I did take the doors off. There was no damage to them when I took them off, despite the fact that it was a nail-biting, hair-raising, sweat-on-the-brow process. But in doing so, I took off these internal door panels right here. There are 2 of these. And people said, well, you shouldn't have done that because the doors are so fragile, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, yeah, but I don't want this added weight on the doors while I'm trying to clean them. You know, I want to equalize the weight on both sides of these doors. You know, they have a kind of L shape to them. And I just didn't want that big gray piece on the other side of it when I was trying to clean each one. And I do think that was, on some level, the right decision. So in order to put these back, I definitely want to make sure that I do this right the first time because I don't want to have to do this again. These doors, I mean, they go for crazy money. And the fact that these 2 doors survived in a crawl space for that long is mind-blowing to me. I just don't want to, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth on this one. So I'm looking at the blueprints here, the original blueprints for the Defiant sheet, just to refresh my memory on which one goes where. And it looks to me like this one with the yellow circular stickers on it, right up there. It looks to me like this one goes with the door that has the shuttle fin hole. I'm looking, and it's this door. So let's make sure the door isn't sitting on anything except this towel while we go through this process. All right, now there is an elevator piece, if you can see that, this elevator piece. And we want to put that in here before we secure everything down. So it goes into a slot right here, and then I hate working around these doors. Come on, there we go. All right, so the elevator is now on its track. The elevator is now on the track and ready to go. All right, so we're going to very gingerly set this down. Okay. Obviously, we're going to want this elevator higher so that there is room for the fin to come through. I assume that's what we want. I'll just put it up at the top there, and we'll just leave it like that. Okay. We have this lined up with the screw holes. We have our screws, and we are not going to be, I just lost a screwdriver under the crawler. We are not going to be over-torquing these by any stretch of the imagination. I've also already pre-stickered these interior panels as well. And we're just going to listen to what the Defiant doors want in terms of screwing these down. Is that moving? It's got a little bit of give. All right, tell you what, we're going to screw down the other side and then see what it's like at that point. Trying to consciously not put downward pressure on the door itself while I'm doing this. And also trying to figure out why my screwdrivers have decided they don't want to play anymore. This is a Hasbro toy. All right, so we're going to put in our railings. Oop, what was that? I don't like that. I don't like it when the blue door shifts. This is almost the last step, but it is the most crucial step and the one I really have been dreading out of all of these steps. After we do this and we do it successfully, there will only be like 3, maybe 5 more pieces to put on, something like that. But I now have to get the hinge pins back into this thing. They come in through the back and they push all the way through and they thread through the doors and the crawler cradle. So in order to assist me with this process, I'm using the silicone grease that I referred to earlier in the video to just make sure that these rods aren't, you know, going to get hung up. They probably will on some level, but I don't want them to get friction hung up. I really want this to be, you know, a smooth operation. Okay, hold on to your butts. It's making me nervous. My hands are sweating. Oh, that's one. That's one. It's all the way through. All right, I'm just going to do the second one, and then we'll get on to the final bits. As is typical for restorations of this magnitude, I was of the impression that I had gotten every single piece I needed. And in this process, as with a lot of these, it became kind of a bump, 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 bump kind of moment where I miscounted the number of cannon mounts that I would need for the gantry by 1. So I have ordered that last mount, and it will be here for the big review of the Defiant. But just know that at the end of this restoration, you're going to see or spot one missing part if you're eagle-eyed, because I won't be able to attach all 4 cannons to the gantry. I'm only going to be able to attach 3, but the mount is on its way, and it will be here for the big final review video. You will see the Defiant completely, you know, outfitted with all of its parts. It just, I don't know what happened. I could have sworn I had all the right parts, but I was missing 1 by a miscount. And this is the offending piece right here. I have 4, I needed 5. Don't know how that worked out. Before we get on to the very final bit, we have one last part to attach to the gantry itself, and that is the exterior access ladder, which slots into 3 tabs right here. And that piece was missing from this childhood original, and it has now been returned to this piece, reinstated. So that really sets off all of the pieces of the gantry. And I know by now you're asking yourselves, what about hardtop? What about the figure? Well, we're getting to that right now. Well, we're at the final moment, barring that one gun mount, which will be here for the review, like I've said. But the rarest piece of the Defiant, and I mean the whole shebang, is not the little up and down thing. It's not Payload's umbilical from the shuttle. It is actually hardtop with his helmet mic. It's one of those annoying Hasbro accessories that came with heavy metal with the Mauler. It came with Sneak Peek. It came with Lift Ticket with the Tomahawk. It came with a number of figures, that little peg-in helmet mic. And of course, it was missing from this childhood original. Now, hardtop was with it, but he didn't have that helmet mic. And at first I thought, well, I can leave it out and then point out that it's really hard to find. And then I was like, well, no. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get a repro, because there are a lot of repros out there. And, you know, I am of the opinion that, you know, those little pieces of plastic you shouldn't pay a lot of money for. And I was like, well, he's also missing his pistol, so I'd need his pistol, and I really don't want to repro the pistol. So I thought, this is a childhood survivor. It needs some A-level, you know, attention given to it. It's been in a crawl space for 33 years, and this was gifted to me, and I thought, I'm going to do it up to the nines. And so I decided that my personal contribution, I know I put a lot of time, effort, and money into it, but my personal touch to this end result is a all-original hardtop action figure. And there it is, I almost panicked. This is an all-original hardtop action figure, complete with his authentic original gun. Slowly but surely, I might go and find like the file cards and things like that, but as far as the plastic physical toy is concerned, we are complete on this Defiant for the RetroBlasting Studio. This is now a completed Defiant. The last gun mount is on its way. It will be here for the review. But yeah, thanks for watching this, guys. I hope this has been interesting. This is going to have a special place here in the RetroBlasting Studio. I haven't decided whether or not the Terrordrome is going to be on top and the Defiant on the bottom. I feel like the Defiant would be safer on the bottom of the display area where I'm putting them both. But yeah, we're going to display this with pride in the RetroBlasting Studio. So thanks for watching this, and we will see you on the next video. If you'd like to see the entire story of the restoration of this Defiant, you can watch our Defiant restoration playlist here. And if you just want to watch more videos about toy restorations, you can watch our toy restorations playlist here. And now I've got to figure out how I'm going to get this thing off the table.